All right. Okay, so welcome everyone to our Building Watershed Resilience webinar series. My name is Deirdre Haniff. I'm the Senior Climate Resilience Manager with Charles River Watershed Association, and I'll be your speaker and moderator tonight. On the screen right now, you see the agenda for our presentation. We will start with an overview of our organization and an overview of how we work at the regional scale with our collaborative group. And then we'll be highlighting 2 regional projects going on before we end with Q&A. As we talk about our watershed tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Charles River watershed resides on occupied territories of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. We acknowledge them as past, present, and future caretakers of our land, and we acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is not enough, and we continue to learn, grow, and listen to Native voices as we advocate and work towards our mission. Tonight, you will be hearing from a couple of other speakers besides myself, including my colleague Julie Wood, who's the Climate Resilience Director at CRWA. She'll be highlighting one of our regional scale projects. You'll then hear from our project partners at Landscape Interactions, Evan and Genevieve, on our Drought-Resilient Landscape Design Guide. And then lastly, Meredith Comfrey, who's the conservation agent with the town of Denham, will share from the municipal side how these regional scale projects apply to the local level. And for those who may not be as familiar with us, Charles River Watershed Association, or CRWA, we are an environmental advocacy organization. We've been around since 1965, and to this day, our mission continues to be protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. And like many other urban rivers in the country, we've come a long way from the historical, factory and chemical waste getting dumped right into the river. But our work continues to focus on our mission and ensuring that our river and our watershed is healthy as we face a changing climate. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a map of the Charles River and the 35 towns and cities that are part of our watershed. As you can see, it's quite big, and you'll see from the projects that we're highlighting today, CRWA takes a watershed scale view as we work towards our mission, because we know that what happens upstream doesn't stay upstream. And this is especially true when we look at the impacts of storms and floods. Flooding itself, we know, is a natural phenomena. It's a part of how rivers work. That's why we have floodplains, and that's why we have riverbanks. But in today's world, where we've built a lot of our neighborhoods, our roads, and our infrastructure really close to the river, that flooding is increasingly putting people and property at risk. And we've also turned a lot of our land and landscape into impervious surfaces, which has prevented a lot of our rainwater from being able to be absorbed into the ground. And that also accelerates accumulation of water during these heavy rain events. And we also know that with climate change, these storms we're seeing today are going to get bigger. They're going to dump more inches of water into our communities. And so what you'll hear in a little bit is how we are preparing to adapt and manage these larger future storms across the watershed. And on the opposite, but still related end of climate impacts in our watershed, our communities are also battling against extreme heat and drought. We know that with climate change, as it warms our planet, our atmosphere is able to absorb and hold a lot more moisture and kind of act like a sponge around the earth. That allows for more water to stay up in the sky, and that can get dumped in the heavy rainfall we just talked about. But that also means that the water cycle is getting changed and disrupted, and that water is coming from our streams and our ponds and our rivers. That's evapotranspirating into the air, and that's how we've also gotten a lot more of these intense drought conditions, which you probably have been hearing about because the entire state is currently in a drought. And this has followed 2 years of Massachusetts having below average rainfall. So that has been putting a lot more pressure on our local water supplies and our local municipalities. And you can see some images that I've added to the slides of parts of our river and our streams that have run dry over the past 4 years from some of the intense drought in our region. And with both flooding and drought, those impacts don't respect or care about town boundaries. And in Massachusetts, a lot of our drought management and flood management are not coordinated across municipalities, which is why we created the Charles River Climate Compact. So we formed that in 2019, and it really is a regional partnership of over 20 watershed towns and cities in our watershed, focused on working collaboratively to increase climate resilience for the watershed. And that includes identifying and implementing solutions to our shared climate challenges. So tonight, like I said, we're highlighting 2 climate compact projects. One is on flooding and one is on drought. I'm going to pass it to my colleague Julie to introduce our first one.
Thank you, Dira. And thank you all for joining us. I know we are competing with some World Cup action. Appreciate seeing some folks online. Joanna and I's third member of the climate team is actually enjoying the game down in Foxborough. So otherwise, I'm sure she'd be happy to be here with us. I have a lot to cover. I'm going to talk go through it pretty quickly. I will not talk quickly for the translation services. But any questions, please just feel free to ask and we can go over anything that didn't come through at the end. The Charles River Flood Model was developed in partnership with the Charles River Climate Compact that Dira told you about and Weston Sampson Engineering to serve as a predictor for where and when flooding will occur in our watershed, but also as a tool to help us assess how we can reduce the anticipated flooding impacts of climate change in our watershed. So it helps us understand them and then helps us test out solutions. Next slide. We've been working on this, like I said, for a few years now. After understanding those base conditions back in 2021, we quickly transitioned to understanding solutions. In 2022, we published the first version of our adaptation and flood mitigation plan. Between then and 2024, we really built on that, identified new solutions and updated the plan. And then since then, we've identified even more solutions, many of which we will walk you through today, especially the more recent ones, such as those that have been identified this year in 2026. Next slide. One of the important tenets of this initiative has been to have full data democracy. So all of the information that we've used the flood model to produce is available online. We have an online viewer. You can type in an address, zoom in, see where and when flooding will occur in your neighborhood or your area of interest. There's a bunch of different other legend items that you can turn on and off to help you orient yourself or just understand what the impacts of this anticipated flooding might be, and a bunch of different storm scenarios you can check out. Next slide. So flooding is a natural occurrence. That's one thing we always like to just lay a base understanding. Flooding occurs naturally. Why are we talking about it? What we're really talking about is flooding impacts. So in a truly natural system, we have floodplains, and those floodplains are there to deal with and be receptive to high flow periods. The way we've developed our modern infrastructure, a lot of times we've built in those floodplains, we've built into wetlands, which are the natural sponges of our landscape where water would be stored. So we've altered the hydrology, the way water moves in our watershed significantly. And we have no longer made room for these flooding occurrences. So what we're really talking about is flooding impacts, where these flooding waters are impacting our modern infrastructure, our homes, our businesses. But we needed as a group to kind of define that. What are we really trying to do with this initiative? So we set out 3 goals. Are there solutions that we can find that reduce future flooding impact on critical infrastructure? Are there solutions we can find that prevent flooding in environmental justice neighborhoods, areas where individuals may not have the resources to self-adapt? Can we find some communal solutions there that the state or the city can invest in? And future flooding is no worse than the present day as our climate changes. This is the metric we're going to run through today. So you'll see a simulation or a model run of what the flooding would look like today with no activity, what flooding would look like in the future with no interventions or no solutions. And then you'll see what would flooding look like in the future with solutions. So we're going to walk through a bunch of graphs that look at compare on that third metric. Here is our first one. We've looked at solutions in a bunch of different scales. Today, we're going to be talking mostly about site scale solutions. But to kick off, we wanted to share our most impressive watershed scale solution. This is a solution that we nicknamed the Watertown Rule. What we tested with this modeling scenario is if every community had the strongest stormwater regulations that currently exist in our watershed, and those exist in the city of Watertown. So we assumed that everyone takes those Watertown regulations and over time applies them. And over time, this will build significantly more storage into our landscape. Because in Watertown, what they're requiring is that when private properties develop or redevelop, they are storing 8.2 inches on site. This is significantly higher than many other communities. Waltham is now doing something on par. I think the next highest is about half of this required storage, and that would be in Cambridge. So it is really building a lot of storage into the landscape, which is a key solution to addressing flooding. You'll often hear folks maybe talk about a first flush or 1 inch for water quality. We have to do a lot more when it comes to flooding. So here's that graph I described, baseline no action, that's current day storm without doing anything. 2070 no action is 2070 storm without doing anything. And then that third bar is the 2070 storm, assuming the Watertown Rule is in place. So 2070 with action. And this is an example of where we are making future flooding no worse than today. So in this one, goal achieved. Next slide. Through the project, we've come up with a number of recommendations. These have been revised and evolved over the project, but we've recently consolidated them, and really it's 4 key lessons learned from the initiative. 1 is take action. The size and impact of flooding that is anticipated for our watershed from climate change is large. Yes, we are looking at a 2070 storm that may seem far away. Adapting all of our infrastructure will take a long time, so we need to start taking action now. We have some site-specific designs that we've looked at that allows us to have these designs in the pipeline and start to move. I already went through the Watertown Rule assessment, but strong stormwater regulations that account for flooding, not just water quality, make a big difference. Number 3, work with partners to identify and implement projects. A lot of the project ideas that have come through this initiative, well, all of them were submitted by someone other than CRWA, basically, but some of them have come direct from residents and community groups. Most of them have come from our community partners, our staff our municipal staff partners. And then exploring regional governance structures. We're extremely proud of what been able to do with this voluntary partnership. Very grateful to the state for funding it. But there's a limit to how much really can be accomplished through volunteer partnerships and initiatives like this. So having a more formal governance structure around flooding, like they do in other parts of the state, is starting to make sense for us here in Massachusetts, we think. Next slide. I mentioned that we have looked at a lot of sites, and we're going to get into these, but just an overview map of where they are across the watershed. Next slide. What we've done is developed concept designs for these sites. These are very high-level designs, do not take into account a lot of the engineering detail that you need once you go to construction. But they do take into account site conditions, and in our case, we also do community outreach. And then the modeling results, I'm going to show you a few caveats. They are highly dependent on the size of the sub-watershed that the site is located in. The Charles River Flood Model covers almost 270 square miles, so it's a large area. That means there's a limit to how much detail we can have in small areas. And I'll highlight that as we go through. I've already mentioned this. We looked at three things: the subwatershed current conditions with no activity or no solution, the subwatershed future conditions with no activity or no solution, and then the subwatershed with future conditions with the proposed priority solution or priority site. Sites that perform well against this metric, it means it's essentially able to mitigate all of the climate-induced runoff in the entire subwatershed, which is a very high bar to have one site mitigating runoff from a large area, but you'll see we actually found a few sites where this is possible. Next slide. So our first two priority sites, one is Poets Corner Park in Arlington, the second Ward's Park Pond in Sherburne. Poets Corner is a park with athletic fields. The town is very interested in giving it a makeover and an upgrade. That is a wonderful time to build storage into the park, and a wonderful time to also build green infrastructure and water quality treatment in the park. So we love partnering with towns on projects like that. We're happy to have just finished one in Newton, underground storage under an updated athletic field. This site has a few site constraints around soil conditions. So we were somewhat modest in our proposals, but some green infrastructure and then some subsurface infiltration. This site also is not able to capture a ton of runoff from surrounding areas. It's a relative high point in the neighborhood, so there's only some areas that drain to it. Ward's Park Pond in Sherburne is a very interesting site. It's a pond that is currently flowing into the town's stormwater drainage system. Now, this can be a problem if water from the pond is going into the stormwater drainage system, taking up space, and then when we get rain, that rainwater runoff needs to go into the stormwater drainage system. Some of those pipes are already filled with the pond's water. So this area of the town's stormwater drainage system does back up and does fill up. So we wanted to get that water from the pond out of there, or at least let the town be able to stop it. The pond is also used by the town for fire suppression. So we wanted to keep that water in there. So changing that outlet to allow the water to stay in the pond and store even more water during a large storm is a key solution that we're recommending for this site, as well as some green infrastructure sites. And then there's a pond connected to the south, which is impacted by some agricultural activity going on right around the property there. So we're recommending some treatment there for nutrient pollution. Now we'll walk through the modeling results. So Arlington is in a very large subcatchment. So my caveat from the front, that influences the modeling results quite significantly. So this is the largest subcatchment of the four that we'll see tonight, over 2,000 acres, compared to the site is much smaller, and a lot of impervious cover as well. Next slide. So looking at this large subwatershed scale level, the site does not offer a sizable amount of runoff reduction. It does offer a very small amount, but this site, the flood mitigation benefits would likely be more local surrounding that property, or the streets right around it. Next slide. For Arlington, smaller subcatchment area, only 100 acres, not quite as developed. Just a summary there again of the recommendations for increasing the pond storage, adding bioretention, and the constructed wetland treatment system. And next slide, we'll see the results in the same format. So current day or baseline, no action, 2070, no action, and then 2070 with the suggested recommendations for the Ward Pond site. So a lot better here, 30% reduction in the full subwater shed from just this one site mitigation recommendation. This is something you'll see another example of and that we've found in the project to date. Using ponds across the watershed where it's appropriate to store floodwater is a promising solution. Next slide, we'll visit our final two priority sites, Tankfield and Milford. This is in the upstream of the watershed, similar to Poets Corner. This is a area the town used to use for recreation, youth athletics, had to stop because of some safety issues with accessing the site. It's a very busy intersection. So the town is really interested in investing in the site with safer parking, and better recreational fields. Again, opens the door to an opportunity to also add some improvements. So under field storage, green stormwater infrastructure, the part of the site is wooded, a little hard to see in this photo, but part of the site is wooded, and there's an intermittent stream that flows through the wooded area. So widening that stream channel, and also making even an overflow or a swale to store even more water in this wooded area, where it's safe to store floodwater and can potentially protect downstream areas. The Walker Pond site, recently acquired by the City of Watertown, and the city led a wonderful visioning process with the community for a park redesign. We were able to get a lot of information from that process and attend meetings through that process, to understand what the community wanted there, get a sense of pond conditions. Here our recommendations again are using the pond for storage. This pond, similar to the one in Sherburne, it is flowing into the city's stormwater drain system, taking up capacity that it doesn't need to take if we can just control that outlet and stop it from flowing out when we don't want it to. Here, opportunity to maybe use some adjacent wetlands for storage as well, and then some smaller green stormwater infrastructure and permeable paver activities. Lots of invasives here, lots of invasives in both sites, so invasive removal opportunities there. Next slide. Starting in Watertown, 150 acres is this subcatchment. The location of this site at the very downstream end of this subwatershed, and that it's a relatively large site, actually means it performed quite well. Next slide, Dira. This recommendation actually almost completely mitigates that climate-driven flooding. So back to that goal, future flooding is no worse than the flooding of today. This one is really almost just about there. So again, really promising using that pond and its location, right there at the bottom of that subwatershed is key. Next slide. Milford, smallest of the subwatersheds, This site, similarly located at the downstream end, means it can capture a good amount of that runoff. So this site actually performed the best of all. Next slide. Was able to mitigate the full runoff impact for the watershed and actually make it even better than present day conditions. If you're keeping an eye on the numbers, these total runoff volumes, 1.42 million gallons. This is the smallest scale because it's the smallest area that's generating runoff. But relatively speaking, a great performance there from that site. So key opportunity to have the space to collect and infiltrate the water, and then key opportunity to have that site location at the downstream location of the subwatershed. Next slide. That was really important for us to do at this point in the initiative. While we always like to acknowledge this is a watershed scale project and everything around flooding really needs to be discussed at the watershed scale, otherwise you're not getting the full picture. We also wanted people to understand the impacts more at a community scale, since that's a scale that people much more regularly relate to. So we produced a lot of information in community-specific information sheets. So chances are, if you live in the watershed, there is one of these for your community, and we hope you come across it soon. They'll be on our website, but we're also going to get them out in the community with community-specific information about how flooding will impact your town or city. Next slide. All of this will also be on a really cool interactive map where you can select your community. It'll zoom right in there. You'll get to see those impacts right close up and personal. And then all of the data will be summarized for you as far as what to expect. So look for that coming soon to our website. And hopefully everyone is signed up for our river current, and you'll see that in there as well. Next slide. Thank you for listening to the flooding section. And with that, I will hand it over to our partners to cover the Drought Resilient Landscape Design Guide.
Thanks, Julie. Before I hand it off to Landscape Interactions, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the goals of this second project that we took on. So the second regional project we started this spring is on a drought resilient landscape design guide for municipalities. And this is funded through the state's Drought Resiliency and Water Efficiency Grant. We pursued this project, one, in response to a need expressed by one of our watershed municipalities to have an established, drought resilient plant guide that they can easily use for their municipal landscaping projects, instead of having to recreate one for every new project. And then two, wanting to have consistency for drought management across the watershed region. So really, by having this pre-vetted climate appropriate design standards, we're aiming to support regional and statewide goals to reduce watershed-wide water use, especially during drought periods, because as you'll see, we're encouraging practices that are sustainable and anticipate recurring drought conditions, but are also designed to get to that zero watering needs by the town. Even though this is kind of specific to our watershed, it will be applicable and replicable to other urban watersheds in the Northeast region. In fact, part of this grant, we're actually collaborating with the town of Ipswich as they design their drought resilient guides for homeowners to convert traditional lawns to more diverse landscapes. And so with that, I will pass it off to our partners. Is it Evan or Genevieve who's going first?
I'll be presenting.
Perfect. Let me stop screen share.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. So we are sort of at, 85% completion with this project. The concept is to create sort of like a handbook of visual landscape designs that any homeowner, any municipal land manager, or even a developer that's sort of interested or forced to make a drought-tolerant landscape will have a number of resources at their fingertips, free and available to download, to create a truly drought-tolerant landscape. And the key to that is really using native plants. So as our process for this, we've developed a series of different designs. I'll show them to you, and then I'll show you the plant list. And the idea is that with this plant list, all plants are native to the Northeast. They're all only the most drought tolerant, ranging from trees and shrubs all the way down to the smallest flowers and grasses. The idea is that anyone could, if they wanted to, make substitutions, modify these designs, and make them their own. They're all scalable and replicable. So I'll take you through that. So this first one is very adaptable. It's a rain garden design. This was one of the requests from our stakeholders. And so the idea here is we've identified 3 different zones in a rain garden. You have the center, which is the lowest point. That's typically the part that's flooded and holds the water. So we've selected plants that, yes, they can take periodic, flooding, but they can also take periodic drought. And then moving upwards up the slope, you have like the sides of the rain garden and then the tops, the edges. And so this design is very modifiable. We've basically given, anywhere from 6 to 8 different choices for each of these zones. The second 2 designs are meadows that could be installed in a sidewalk hell strip. They could be installed on the edge of a property, facing a sidewalk, facing a road. These could be privacy screens. And this is, again, something that in our scalability efforts, we've made them 50 feet by 4 feet, which is the typical measurement of like a residential neighborhood sidewalk strip. But this could be repeated, 20 times, and it could be an entire front lawn, or it could be an entire yard. So we have one that works for full sun, one that works for full shade. We're also giving street tree recommendations. So here you can see on the right, we've just sort of like symbolically put a street tree in the middle, but this entire shaded sidewalk strip is shade tolerant. Important is to label each plant. So we have unlabeled and labeled versions, depending on how you like to look at things. Like some people want to see every plant labeled. Other people might just want to look at the layout and then go to the plant schedule, which has the each plant, with its symbol and its code. So there's many different ways to figure this out, so to speak. Lastly, and this came more from the Ipswich stakeholders, we have a lawn alternative. This is essentially a native lawn. So rather than having turf grass, you can have native fescues and sedges and other warm season grasses mixed with low-growing flowers. This is something that could be installed in an entire lawn, or it could just be a small area. We've shown here 50 by 50 feet. And all of these plants can tolerate occasional mowing, or you could let them grow without mowing them. So as I mentioned, we have a very comprehensive plant list for this project. Pretty much every type of plant you could think of, from the tallest canopy trees to smaller trees that would be suitable for, under power lines, shade tolerant trees, full sun trees, all the way to shrubs, grasses, sedges, and flowers. So at the moment, our plant list is over 150 species, and we're still adding a few more. So the idea is that you could substitute plants throughout these designs if you wanted to. Like taking the sidewalk strip, important considerations with that, as I showed here, is that they are salt and salt tolerant plants. Most of our sidewalks are salted, or at least the roads that they're next to are salted. So if you didn't want, for example, to use, let's just say, Baptisia tinctoria, yellow walled indigo in your sidewalk strip. So looking at the plant schedule, okay, that's a 3-foot wide spacing, and there's 5 of them in the design. You could go to the plant list. You could find another salt tolerant plant. Let's say right here we have, right above it on the plant list, smooth falls foxglove. Okay, that's not salt tolerant. Maybe that's not a good choice, but we could look somewhere else, and maybe we find you know, actually all these plants are in it, but you know, my point is, pick a plant that's not on the design. Is it salt tolerant? You could add it in. That sort of a thing. This is the part of the project that I got really excited about when I started diving into it. We found a data source from the US Department of Energy that was published in 2010. It's called Guidelines for Estimating Unmetered Landscaping Water Use. And they actually looked at the entire United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. And they divided the US into different zones. So based on the zone that we're in, and actually they called out Boston as their calculation example, they estimated different water use based on if it was a native planting design that was drought tolerant, a semi-drought tolerant native design, or a typical grass. So what I did here was I based this off of drought tolerant, the most drought tolerant native design versus the typical grass. And actually, believe it or not, in Boston, in the greater Boston area, according to this US Department of Energy report, a 1,000 square foot lawn in a typical year uses about 6,600 gallons of water to irrigate. So what we're proud to say is that with any of the plants that you choose from this plant list and from our designs, after the first 1 to 2 years of establishment of the plantings, you will be using 0 gallons of water a year. You will not be watering these designs. And so that will be a 100% reduction irrigation after 1 to 2 years, which means that each of these designs is saving about 6,600 gallons of water per 1,000 square feet. So that is super exciting. And this illustration is simply just calling out some of the key points, which I will mention. I think number one is we can all visually see this is a complete night and day as far as the roots of these plants. And this is the real deal. This is not like a made up scenario. The typical native plants, whether they're in a meadow or a shrub or tree planting, I mean, I'm not even going to go into trees because we all know they have deep roots, but even just a meadow with like native flowers and grasses, the average root depth is 6 to 12 feet. Whereas the average lawn grass is 3 to 4 inches. So what that means is typical subsoils, like the soils below the roots in a lawn, are going to be very compacted because there's no aeration, because there's no roots penetrating them. So that is not only lower soil life and less biodiversity and less carbon being sequestered, but I think most importantly for this project, it's lower water infiltration. We're actually absorbing less water. And then that is being compounded by the fact that we are putting all this water into it by irrigating it. So this project is very compelling for all of our municipalities and all of our homeowners because we are going to be going from, let's just say, upwards of 5 to 7,000 gallons per 1,000 square feet to 0. And we're going to be building more soil carbon sequestration, supporting pollinators and birds, and more soil life, you know, whether that means spiders, worms, mites, water bears, what have you. And this is all based on a verifiable source from our government. Lastly, we're going to be giving a guidance for how to create a meadow. And we're going to be giving very specific guidelines with different options. Anywhere from, you know, sheet mulching or sod cutting to tarping. or removing grass using like equipment, like in the case of like a development project. So this part of the project is still, I still haven't written up those guidelines, but we do have a seed mix that we've created that is drought tolerant to the extreme, which I've got listed here. And we're going to make that seed mix available for purchase through Prairie Moon. So basically, you'll just call in the seed mix. We'll have the name with a QR code, and you can just go and probably most likely you have to email them or phone them up. It won't necessarily be like a website link, but you'll be able to call in the seed mix, and it will be, you'll just order it based on how many acres or how many square feet you need. And then we'll have best management practices that are, the most keyed in towards our drought tolerant best BMPs. So that's sort of where we're at. There'll be a meadow mix. There'll be the native lawn alternative, 2 different types of meadows, one that is shade tolerant, one that is full sun, and the comprehensive plant list for the project. That's all I've got right now. Happy to take any questions or comments from you all. Or actually, perhaps we should first hear from Meredith and then maybe open for the Q&A at the end.
Yes. I put a reminder in the chat. If you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to send them over. And I'm actually going to screen share again before I pass it off to Meredith. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Should I just get started, Dira?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Meredith Confrey. I am the conservation agent for the town of Dedham. I'm so distracted now because that was such a great presentation, and it really fired me up about just getting these guidelines out to the public. And I think our residents would really benefit from the native plant guideline that Evan just presented. So really, really excited about that. But I guess to start, I'll just kind of talk about where Dedham falls in the Charles River watershed and then some of the programs that we're working on with the Charles River watershed team. So Dedham, 9 miles of the Charles River is kind of runs through Dedham. So it's a pretty integral part of our community. There's actually a neighborhood that literally sits on we call it Dedham Island, on the middle of the Charles River as it wraps around this neighborhood. So I think that kind of gives you a picture of just how important education on flooding and our rivers is, because unfortunately back in the 50s and 40s, they didn't really think about flooding in terms of where they're putting development and putting neighborhoods. And so we literally have a neighborhood right in where a perfect floodplain should be for the Charles River. We also have Route 1 that kind of basically just juts through the Charles River watershed. So as you're driving along Route 1 on Providence Highway from Dedham to West Roxbury, if you turn your head to the left, you'll look out and see parts of the Charles River. So it's very front of mind for a lot of residents in our town. A lot of residents have experienced flooding, and we have a pretty strong stormwater regulation kind of bylaw in our town. Not as strong as Watertown, but for that reason, it's starting to become more part of the conversation with residents as they kind of become aware of green solutions to help solve some of this flooding that they're experiencing. So I will talk about one project that we're working on with the Charles River Watershed Association. So this is at Barnes Memorial Park. This is kind of a little bit outside of the downtown area of Dedham. It's a park that many people use, and it's pretty centrally located. There's a stream that kind of runs from one of our ponds called Wigwam Pond, and it runs just kind of along the side of the park. And it's a fairly healthy stream. It's definitely, because it's in kind of an urban environment, it's experience some sedimentation and some kind of infilling, I guess. But for the most part, there's a, sort of healthy, as healthy as you can be in an urban environment, vegetative buffer that kind of runs along the stream, but then it's right up against this a couple baseball fields, and then kind of larger park area. And so one of the benefits of having the flood model that Julie was showing you all earlier is project siting. And so that was a really helpful tool in kind of locating this as a spot to do some flood storage and green infrastructure improvements. So when you look at this site on the flood model, it gets kind of flagged as one of a parcel that does flood a lot and could benefit from some additional flood storage. In addition to that, it's also a park used by people very frequently, and that's a pretty real, I guess, disadvantage to the flooding that happens is that, if those fields flood, people can't use them, games have to get canceled. And so it's really helpful to have that kind of buy-in from the public on kind of pushing forward these projects when they experience flooding just, on the day-to-day. And so this project's going to be really amazing. It's currently, I think the Charles River is currently trying to get funding for it. It basically involves a couple of different solutions on the site. So one is stream storage. So you can see that on number 2 there. Basically, the stream right now kind of follows the edge of the park. And so there's a little bit of room to basically add almost like a little bend in the stream and create a natural wetland area around it. And that will be just extra storage, more of that like sponge area that Julie was talking about that wetlands provide. So that when that stream does flood, there's space for it to go, and it's not just going to sheet flow onto the baseball fields. There's also a open space, renaturalized open space area. I think that would probably look more like a meadow planting kind of area like Evan was talking about. Again, it's really helpful to have blueprints for kind of what a planting plan could look like. Because when we finally do get funding, it can go really quickly, and you have to just have a turnkey project ready to go to actually start constructing things. So having kind of that pre-planning of like, okay, here's what a blueprint for a meadow planting plan could look like is really helpful to have ahead of time. And then additionally, there's some green stormwater infrastructure proposed as well. I believe that's in the street, maybe with some updated catch basins or, some areas for water to infiltrate. But yeah, so this project is going to be really great. I'm really excited to see it come to life. And just to kind of reiterate, from the municipal perspective, like we're always a little bit limited on time and resources. So it's great again to have those blueprints for like a native planting plan, or if a resident reaches out about how to renaturalize their yard, or they're interested in taking over one of those hell strips, like Evan called it, but the strip between their house and the street. It's just really handy to have that stuff ready to go. Additionally, since we work with the Conservation Commission here in Dedham, a lot of our projects end up being redevelopment projects in the riverfront because we have both the Charles and the Neponset River. And as part of mitigation for that, we always require, a 2-to-1 renaturalized area per area that's disturbed. And so it is really great to have some kind of ready to go native plant list to provide developers or applicants because they're kind of just guessing, and they're, sometimes they don't know, or they might not be familiar with plants that would actually thrive in this environment. And we want to, on the commission side of things, we want to limit as much as possible the developers need to irrigate a lot. So obviously they'll have to irrigate in the first couple of years, but the hope is that in the future, they're just really not using water for that at all. So again, it's definitely just really helpful to have that list ready to go. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dira.
Great. Thanks so much, Meredith. It's always exciting to hear how municipalities can take what we've done at this scale and bring it really on the ground. As I said in the beginning, I think those are all of our speakers, and so we're gonna close out with some Q&A time for folks. I have opened up the chat, so if folks have any questions, they can put it in the chat. But we are also a smaller group today, so I'm happy, if folks want to raise their hand and speak up and ask their question, we can definitely do that as well. I don't see any questions yet in the chat, and I guess while folks are thinking about their questions, or if you have a comment, just a comment as well, I'm gonna also just add in the chat while we're all here, we do have a flood survey related to our flood model project, so if folks have the time, either now or after the webinar, would be still great to hear from you all about your ideas for flood mitigation in your community. So I'm just going to put that in the chat. All right, any questions, any thoughts? Or maybe our presentation was just so thorough, comprehensive, folks are still kind of taking it in. All right, thanks, Jonathan. No questions, no takers. I also can't see all of my screen fully. All right. Well, I know, oh, Julie. Did you?
Oh, I was gonna say you could probably take the slides down to,
Oh, yes.
yeah, just to see everybody, I guess, just in case.
Because I can't see everybody.
Yes. And I'll also put in a second plug for the survey that Dira linked in the chat. As much input as we can get is extremely helpful to this whole process.
All right. Well, I don't see any hands up and I don't see any questions. As I said in the beginning, we will be sharing a recording of this slide. So I know a lot of folks also like to watch our recordings after the presentation too. And we'll also be sharing all the updates, whether it's links to our updated community one-pagers for the flood model, and in the near future, also links and the final product for our drought-resilient landscape guide, which we're really excited to share, especially, as folks think about any projects they have in this coming fall season. But I'll also be sharing, obviously, our contact information. You can obviously contact me directly if you have any questions related to any of our projects, but I'm sure any of our partners would be happy to connect with you as well if you have any questions related to the project, especially on the technical side of things, if you do have them. But I guess with that, I'll just note that obviously you want to thank again our partners and funders. We obviously couldn't do this work without them. All of this, as we highlight, it's a regional scale project collaborating amongst municipalities, but it's also really a collaboration with community groups, residents, and obviously our state partners and funders as well. All right, still no questions, no hands up. So I guess I'll just say a thank you to all of you for attending and those who are watching this after or later on. Again, we will be sending a follow-up with emails and links to things. And then I guess my final thank you is also to our speakers and Sylvia for our interpretation.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Every World Cup game is on real grass, by the way.
Yes, they had to change it at Boston Stadium. Pretty crazy. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's good for the players. It's more healthy, but and you know, I don't like AstroTurf, but it
That's a
is
good fun fact.
definitely not drought tolerant. Let's put it that way.
Maybe next World Cup we'll see some meadows along the
Yeah.
along the side.
In our research though, I did find that fescues, one of which is native to Massachusetts, which is red fescue. That's like a typical one of the plants in a lawn among many. They tend to be more drought tolerant than some of the other grasses that are in meadow mixes or lawn mixes. So I am considering for the lawn alternative that there would be a component of it that's like the red fescue, just to kind of give that texture of a lawn, but not be like the dominant because it doesn't really promote much as far as like insect diversity, or it doesn't have very deep roots, for example. But it's interesting because the fescues are better than some of the other types of grasses like that they use. Just a side note, but thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. Yeah, good fun fact about that as well. And you know, for a lot of different reasons, folks will still like to have some kind of lawn, you know, scape on their property. So always thinking about the better alternative is, you know, moving in the right direction for us.
Yeah, or it could be like part of a lawn,
Right.
or like just a bed in a median that would have been grass. Now it could be this.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for
Thank
staying
you.
tuned in.
Good night.
Thanks so much.
Have a good night.